On appropriations will now come to order, having established quorum. To my far left, Councilman Dom. To my right, Councilman Johnson and Councilman David O. Will the clerk read the title of the bills?
Bill number 161010, an ordinance authorizing transfers and appropriations for fiscal year 2017 from the general fund, certain or all city offices, departments, boards, and commissions, the water fund, the water department, the grants revenue fund, the director of finance, provision for other grants, and to the general fund, certain or all other offices, departments, boards, and commissions, the water fund, certain or all other offices, departments, boards, and commissions, the county fuels tax fund, certain or all other offices, departments, and boards, and commissions, the special gasoline tax fund, certain or all other city offices, department, boards, and commissions, and the aviation fund, certain or all other offices, departments, boards, and commissions. Bill number 161012, an ordinance authorizing transfers and appropriations for fiscal year 2016 from the general fund from certain or all city offices, departments, boards, and commissions, and the grants revenue fund, the director of finance, provision for other grants to the general fund, to certain or all city offices, department, boards, and commissions.
Thank you. Just for the record, Bill number 161009 and Bill 161011 are being held. They're related to a library issue, which our budget director will address. With that, Anna. I want to thank the budget director, and just for the record, to my committee members. The budget director was given a series of questions. Her responses and the documentations are provided in everyone's packets, but she will be available for any additional questions after her testimony. Thank you.
Shall I start with the FY16
Yes.
year end? So that's
an end of the year transfer ordinance. We'll start with that, and then we'll do the mid-year for
great. Thank you. Good afternoon, Chairwoman Quinona Sanchez and members of the Appropriations Committee. My name is Anna Adams, and I serve as Budget Director for the City of Philadelphia. I appear before you today to offer testimony on Bill number 161012, which provides for a transfer within the general fund of the amount of $2.9 million and a transfer from the grants revenue fund to the general fund in the amount of $24.4 million. This ordinance will provide transfer appropriations to expenditure classes where shortages have occurred as followed: $782,587 to the managing director to fully fund payroll charges. This amount is partially offset by an internal transfer of $53,891. $360,109 to the Streets Department to fully fund payroll costs that are corollary to the compactor shortage experienced during much of the fiscal year. This amount is partially offset by an internal departmental transfer of $209,672. $11,978,285 to the Fire Department to fully fund overtime costs resulting from brownout elimination and EMS expansion. $809,182 to the Department of Public Property to cover interfund service charges. $625,474 to the Office of Fleet Management to fully fund payroll charges. $250,837 to the Office of Property Assessment to fully fund payroll charges. This amount is fully offset by an internal departmental transfer. $71,070 to the Board of Revision of Taxes to fully fund payroll charges. $320,812 to the District Attorney to fully fund payroll charges. This amount is partially offset by an internal departmental transfer of $148,386. $4.2 million to the Sheriff to fully fund payroll charges due to the transfer of the Warrant Office from the 1st Judicial District. This amount is partially offset by an internal departmental transfer of $24,864. $367,410 to the City Commissioners to fund costs related to the presidential primary. $7.5 million to the FJD, the First Judicial District of Pennsylvania, to appropriate funds per the zero growth agreement between the FJD and the city. This agreement requires the city to appropriate any surplus to the FJD general fund budget and a share of the revenue they generate. $26,936 to various offices to fully fund personal service overages accrued over the course of the fiscal year. This amount is partially offset by internal departmental transfers totaling $19,292. I respectfully request that you report this bill out of committee with a favourable recommendation, and I further request that the rules of council be suspended so as to permit first reading at the next session of council. I appreciate the opportunity to testify before the committee today, and I'm happy to answer any questions you have. Additionally, representatives from departments involved with the transfers are also available as well, and their testimony is also attached in the packet.
Again, let me recognize for the record that Councilwoman Sherelle Parker has joined us. We are going through the bill for the 2016 closeout before we enter into the one for fiscal year and transfers. The chair will recognize Councilman Dom.
Thank you, Madam Chairwoman, and good afternoon.
Good afternoon.
I just have a few basic questions maybe you could help me understand. I'm not going to go through every dollar, even though I'd like to. I'm just going to hit the big pieces. Explain to me why almost $12 million to the fire department to fund overtime costs. Is that the overtime, time and a half, or explain that to me?
So the way it works, this is basically the department ran over their total class 100 by this amount, and it's partly because of the timing of when additional firefighter classes started and ended. So there was about, I think, and the commissioner can correct me where I'm going wrong, but there was about 177 firefighters that were being trained in the academy that didn't start until the end of June, which meant that they were on our payroll but not serving, not being able to actually go out and fight fires or be in the EMS units. And so because of that, we had to backfill and continue doing all the work without those positions being included. The other side of that is also while they're being trained, it also costs us an overtime because as part of the training, the other firefighters have to go out and help do the training, and so they have to be backfilled by overtime. So that's, I think, and then the other part of this in FY16, we, as an administration, ended the policy of brownouts, or the rolling closures of fire stations, and there's a cost involved in ending those rolling closures, and so that's partly why their costs were considerably above.
Let me make sure I understand. It's not the $12 million. It says to fund overtime costs.
That's right.
Is that overtime is usually what, time and a half?
Yeah, I don't know the exact amount for the fire department.
So Mike, I understand if you don't have enough people to fill the positions, but is that $12 million the extra half time, or is that the 1.5?
Well, just in this instance, we had people being paid. All those 170, while they're in the fire academy, they're being paid as full firefighters, but they're not actually deployed, and so we have a shortage being able to be deployed. So it's covering the full costs of overtime, which is more than the cost of an individual, yes. Because this doesn't include fringe benefits. This is just the
Let me ask you,
budget.
as the budget director, I have a question for you on this overtime piece. If I recall, back in May, we determined that for every dollar we pay in salaries, we pay another 72 cents in benefits.
Okay, when we calculate our fringe benefit rate, it's about the 40 to, it varies depending on this, whether you're a civilian or uniform, it's sort of around 40 or 45% of as our sort of fringe benefit costs.
So when we pay overtime,
Yes.
can you let me know at some point what the fringe benefit piece is on the overtime?
Yeah, we can calculate that for you and get that to you.
It should be lower than regular pay, because there's certain base costs.
Yes,
Like
definitely.
you're not getting more insurance and that kind of stuff.
That's right. It will be.
In
It will
some
be less
cases,
than.
it might be cheaper to have overtime than regular.
In so, yeah, and I think some of this is always not a financial analysis, because obviously there is sort of level of can people be as effective if they're continuing on overtime versus being, on straight time. So I think there's a kind of a balance between sort of what's reasonable fiscally versus.
And should we expect this 12 million again in the next year, or we?
So the fire department is actually, with these new firefighters on board, they've made real progress in bringing down their overtime costs. I hope that we will be much, we will hopefully will balance this through kind of the strategies that the fire commissioner is really working on.
So a second question is on the sheriff's department. I'm just going to hit the three big numbers. 4.2 million. But it represents like 21% of the total budget. What caused that?
So, and I know there are representatives from the Sheriff's Office here who can come and help answer that. There was a big transfer of the warrant officers from the courts, and so in that process there is some overtime costs in the training of those, but Ben Haler is here and he can help answer those questions.
Yeah, I'm Ben Haler, Chief Deputy for Finance in the Sheriff's Office. The answer to your question is there are a number of things. The big one this year is that when we took over the warrant office, the warrant officers were not trained, so we had to have a certified deputy go out with them. That was beyond something we had anticipated. That incurred a massive amount of overtime. In addition, we are required to send deputies to State College for recertification training. That incurred a fairly large amount of overtime as well. And the sheriff does not have discretion as to where he places his deputies. They go where the courts are open, where the prisoners need to be taken. So that is another piece of that. It's been a historic problem that the Budget Office and the Sheriff's Office want to correct.
That's insane. Let me keep going on this for a second, though. So is it possible the Sheriff's Department can come back to us with a recommendation on how to avoid this overtime in the future, even if it requires changing some laws? Because we're paying 21% over our budget in overtime.
Yes, it is, but this is an issue that the Budget Office and the Sheriff's Office want to deal with this year because this has been a reoccurring problem.
I know. I guess my question is, how do we fix the problem?
Probably much higher budgeting in the when we submit our budget, but I hate to go there until we're absolutely certain where we can do this.
Okay. Last question is the 7.5 million courts, First Judicial District.
Mr. Hurley, don't leave. I have one more. Can I ask him just a
Yeah.
question? What is it, is there a way that you can calculate for us, because this is a reoccurring theme every year, about the overtime and where it's taking place specifically? I think it's a conversation that particularly folks in CJAB need to have around overtime. I know we're having the same discussions related to the police department overtime now that folks are required to come downtown, so there's added overtime with police officers. So is there a way that you can put that by category so that we know which departments we should be talking to about limiting the overtime?
Is that directed at the sheriff or the Budget
Yeah,
Office?
to the sheriff's office.
Well, we can speak to our...
Because if you can tell us what categories.
Oh,
it's-
yes.
it's-
The answer to
it's
your question is
courts,
yes, we can.
And it's because extended hours, whatever the justification is for us. If you could put that, yeah, so that then we know what are the categories, and it's a conversation that should be had at CJAP, because you're not the only department that's being impacted by some of the first judicial rules.
Yeah, the answer to your question is yes, we can.
Okay, for the last couple of years, so at least we can see a pattern. Okay, thank you. I'm sorry,
Thank you. That's
Councilman Dahl.
okay. Just last quick question, 7.5 million. How do we avoid that in the future? And bigger question, which I've spoken to Judge Skipper Woods about, is how do we get the court system out of the $54 million we have to fund from the city? And I know there's some fees that should be raised and so forth, but I'd love to see a plan in the long term to take us out of that $54 million obligation.
Yeah, I don't know whether, representatives of the courts are here and they can talk a little bit about the revenue sharing agreement, but I think there are several different agreements. My understanding is for how the amount gets calculated, and there are different sort of levels of revenue sharing by different types of revenue. And I think we just don't know until the end of the year, and when we do our reconciliation at the end of the year, about how much is going to be put into that amount, and how much is going to be kind of borne by the general fund versus going to the to the courts. And so I'm not sure there is kind of an easy way of kind of ending this kind of...
But there are fees from 1980 that you mentioned back in May that haven't been raised. And there is inflation, to my knowledge, since 1980. And so that should be addressed, and that should be raised. And that's money that we wouldn't have to fund as a city if we raise those fees.
Yeah, I agree. I think I know that we had a meeting a week or so ago, and there was some conversation with the courts about different types of fees and ones that may require state approval versus kind of local. And so we're definitely in those conversations.
Whatever we can do locally, we'll do to help you get these fees raised, but we should work to get these fees raised. There's not a business in the world that charges the same price from 1980 and 2016. Nobody. We do in the city. That should be raised. One of the last questions for you, Anna, as the budget director.
Mm-hmm.
What strategies or penalties, all these departments, I don't know the process, but is there some sort of a penalty that we can put in place when overspending for overtime to control the overtime that goes on? So that, I always say in the business world, the most valuable employee is the employee who views your money as if it's theirs.
Right.
How do we instill that in government?
And I think for us, we meet with departments really regularly. We have regular check-ins with departments. We focus on a few different things. One of the things we are focusing on this year, in partnership with the Managing Director's Office and the other cabinet members, is to work with departments to better focus on overtime. The Managing Director's Office, for example, has asked each of their departments to submit a quarterly report explaining how they've spent their overtime, projecting their overtime. And I think that emphasis helps, that we're paying attention, we're watching it, and we're wanting to make sure that commissioners and department heads are doing the same thing. In many instances, the challenge we have as a city is that we look at overall Class 100, and we don't just look at overtime in isolation from the rest of their Class 100 budget. So if there are a lot of vacancies within a department, then it's reasonable that they use overtime to make sure that they hit their goals. We also are looking really, especially with program-based budgeting, really looking at performance and really wanting to tie performance to spend. And so it's reasonable in those instances that if they are to hit their goals and hit the targets and whatever the administration is pushing them to do, that they may have to use overtime where there are vacancies. I think where we're trying to make sure is that there's no unnecessary use of overtime, and that's a really difficult thing to judge, but we're working with departments to do that. And these reports are helping. PICA is also having an increased emphasis on overtime, and I think that also helps us sort of hold everybody accountable. It's a challenge. I think it's very difficult to get the balance right between staffing and overtime. Some departments can manage it better than others. We're working with them to come up with strategies, making sure that they can fill, from our side, can we help them through the process of making sure that they can fill the positions when we've given them the budget authority to do that, and being a bit more flexible when we can be. But we're working on it. It's not going to be an easy process, I think.
Okay, thank you very much.
Councilman, can I get back to your question concerning fees? As you know, Council passed legislation earlier this fall increasing fees that are imposed on behalf of the city by the sheriff. These are fees that had not been adjusted since 1997, so it was due. The administration agreed that they should be raised. Council agrees that they should be raised. The day before we were ready to make the changeover, we had a problem in the law department that is yet to be resolved concerning the approach that was taken. This has become a much more complicated problem than anybody thought. The fees are as they were 20 years ago, and until we resolve this problem with law, that's the way it's going to be. If you have any business with the sheriff's office, I think now's the time to do it because the fees are way low.
Are you saying right now that we didn't get that goal accomplished?
No, sir.
It's in the law department. What's going to take for the law department to resolve it?
We are, the representatives of the administration are trying to find out more in detail what their concern is.
Yeah, but every day we wait, we lose money. There needs to be a sense of urgency.
Yes, sir.
Okay.
It makes no sense, but that was the money that we were going to provide to the general fund that would allow us to fill the 35 positions for new deputies that would go into new deputy to secure City Hall. As you know, City Hall is not secured. It's a court building not secured by the sheriff's office. We want to have deputies in here. That was to fund those positions, which you have put in the budget, but it remains unfunded.
Can the administration, I know you can't speak for them, but I'll ask you anyway, can the administration speed this process along and get this resolved?
Yeah, we're working with the law department to make sure that we may have to make some changes to the legislation to make sure that, to sort of satisfy the questions that the law department is asking.
We have no complaint with finance, budget, or the administration. It's a
Okay, thank you.
Problem.
Thank you very much, thank you.
Thank you.
I'm sorry. One more thing related to fiscal year 16. If no one has any questions, then we can move on to the 17. What was the end of the year surplus?
So
Fund balance.
The fund balance? Sorry, I'm just going to get the exact amount. So 148.3 million.
And what was the initial projected fund balance?
At the beginning of the fiscal year? Sorry.
In our 5-year plan?
Oh, in our 5-year plan, or in this administration's 5-year plan, or in
The
the?
previous one?
Sorry.
Isn't it like 70?
76.1.
So it was 76.1. What is the administration's plan on doing with the additional fund balance?
Sorry?
What is the administration's plan with the additional fund balance?
I think there are some costs that we include in the FY17 ordinance, which will, there are a couple of costs in there. Otherwise, we assume it will continue throughout the plan to raise the fund balance levels in general, because they are still very, very low relative to where they should be. And so this will allow us to have a little bit more comfort if in case of any recession or if we have any cash challenges. So we, as an administration, are very focused on trying to raise the fund balance to get it to a more reasonable level.
So the 19 million additional pension payment, is that coming in from fiscal year 17 or from 16 for the closeout?
The
additional pension, we had a
So
hearing earlier.
in 16, we paid the full amount of the appropriations to the pension in the general fund. So there was a change in the mix. The way that our pension payment works is between different types of funds. So we filled
So the
basically
additional 19 million that was
16
is going to come out of came out of 16.
came out of 16.
Okay, I just want to
Yep.
clarify that for the
It was in
record.
16. Yep.
Okay. All right, you can proceed with your testimony for fiscal year 2017.
17. I don't think I'll need to do the introduction again, but I appear before you today to testify on Bill number 161010, which provides for a transfer within the general fund of $8.3 million, within the water fund of $5 million, and a transfer from the grants revenue fund to the general fund in the amount of $50.9 million to other funds for the amount of $17.2 million. This ordinance will provide transfer appropriations to expenditure classes where shortages have occurred and/or additional resources have been deemed necessary as followed. Funding of labor costs totaling $25.2 million, which includes $8.6 million to various city agencies and $533,000 to the police department to accommodate school crossing guard payroll costs associated with the recent DC-33 contract agreement. $1.16 million to various city agencies to accommodate the payroll costs associated with the recent Local 159 contract agreement. $500,000 to the FJD to fully fund salary increases related to the most recent Local 810 arbitration award, and $7.5 million for fringe benefit costs associated with the above. There's a table in my testimony, which I don't think I need to go through, but shows the breakdown for these different labor awards by department. And so you can see those there.
We appreciate the details. Thank you so much for that.
And then other areas being addressed by this ordinance in the general fund are $60,000 to the managing director for additional funds to support a new fiscal position to support the Division of Health and Human Services. This amount is offset by interdepartmental transfers totaling $60,000. $697,000 to fund the Defender Association increase in fringe benefits. $135,000 to the Commerce Department to fully fund personal services overages. $5 million, that's $5.3 million to the Fire Department to implement brownout elimination for $4 million, and additional firefighter class for $1.3 million. $825,000 to the Office of Community Schools and Pre-K in Class 100 to ensure the implementation of community schools and pre-K initiatives. In addition, $330,000 will cover the cost of benefits. This transfer is fully offset internally by $1.2 million in Classes 2 and 3 and 400. $150,000 to the Law Department for the transfer of salaries for 2 land bank attorneys from the Office of Planning and Development. $311,000 to the Office of Planning and Development to fully fund the transfer of 1 position for $61,000 from the Department of Licenses and Inspections, and $250,000 to services provided on behalf of the land bank. $50,000 in internal transfer from Class 100 to Class 200 within the Office of Arts and Culture and the Creative Economy for support for community services projects and professional services. $400,000 to the Office of Innovation and Technology for the Delaware Valley Intelligence Center, with $215,000 in Class 100 and $185,000 in Class 200. $500,000 to the City Commissioners for costs related to the presidential and special elections. $1.5 million transfer from the Warrant Office from the 1st Judicial District to the Sheriff's Office. $50,000 transfer of funding for the Commission on African and Caribbean Affairs from the Office of the Director of Finance to the Mayor's Office. $2.6 million to the Department of Prisons for the increase of outside inmate housing costs. $90,000 to the Department of Public Health to implement a tobacco reduction initiative. $214,000 to the Department of Streets for special gas tax fund reimbursement in order to be compliant with state audit findings. $10.9 million to the Department of Finance to meet the funding requirements of the pension MMO. $1 million to the Department of Licenses and Inspections to fund demolitions of imminently dangerous residential structures. $500,000 to the Office of Housing and Community Development in Class 200 to increase the contract for the Pennsylvania Horticultural Society for the Reentry Initiative, and $10,000 to the Office of Labor to cover $7,000 in Class 200 and $3,000 in Class 3 or 400 that was not funded in the creation of the office. This amount is fully offset by an internal transfer of $10,000 from Class 100. There are other funds. Would you like me to continue? I realize I'm sort of reading the whole thing. The county liquid fuel tax, special gasoline tax, sort of for the streets department.
Yeah, we just hit the big ones.
And then now the water department, there's $3 million to cover the payroll costs attributable to the DC 33 contract agreement, and there's a table below showing that there, as well as $5 million to the Department of Revenue Sinking Fund Commission to increase the debt reserve fund. This transfer is fully offset by $4 million in Class 100 and $1 million in Class 800 from the water department, and $3 million to the finance to meet the funding requirements of the pension MMO. Aviation fund has $1.148 million to accommodate the payroll costs for DC 33, as well as $2 million for the pension MMO. I respectfully request that you report this bill out of committee with a favourable recommendation, and I further request that the rules of council be suspended so as to permit first reading at the next session of council. I appreciate the opportunity to testify before this committee today and would be happy to answer any questions you have. Additionally, representatives from all the departments involved are here as well.
Okay. I'm sure there's going to be tons of questions. Quickly, just want to go back to the issue brought off earlier around overtime. In light of the fact that in this mid-year transfer, we have quite a bit of it, and what it means for what is expected to the end of the year, what additional steps are you taking to monitor that department by department to rein that in?
So, as I mentioned before, we have and so a few things that we're doing. One is that we have a quarterly report from every department which talks about what they spent compared to what they projected they would spend by quarter and what their plans are for the upcoming quarters. We are sort of showing increased emphasis every time we meet with the department. We ask them about it and we push them, as well as the managing director's office. They are also taking a big focus with their commissioners to make sure that everybody is focusing on overtime. One of our challenges that we're still trying to think through is that we have a lot of special events overtime, which come up through the year, and we need to sort of find a better way of showing the revenue kind of coming into that department to be offset so that you could see it a bit more clearly. Right now, a department could get fully reimbursed for their overtime, but it may show up as a reimbursement, sort of a lump sum reimbursement that goes to the managing director's office, and so it's not quite as clearly designated as this is police department overtime, fully offset by this revenue coming in. So I think there are a few things that we need to do to make it sort of more transparent about what's going on, as well as focusing on areas where we can reduce overtime without it having a detrimental impact on services. And that's the balance we're trying to strike with departments, making sure that they can do all the work they need to do, bearing in mind if they have vacancies, but also kind of clamping down on unnecessary overtime, and getting that balance right is something that we are focused on.
Can we have somebody from the police department come up so we can talk a little bit about that? I know the last time we asked for an itemization of police overtime, they were lined item out. Just want to know, you talked about special events. If I recall, that number was fairly low in comparison to some of the other overtime. So I'd like to know specifically where see the commissioner coming up, where specific line items are off our projections.
Good afternoon, Councilwoman, panel. With regards to your questions with line items, one of the issues that we deal with pretty well is the planned stuff that we know about. Over the last couple months, we've had a lot of challenges related to election results and things that we were not anticipating, yet had to police protests and other events that weren't on our calendar. We always know we have Welcome America and the New Year's Day Parade, and some of those are challenges that are hard to project. But we have an overtime code for pretty much anything you could imagine, so we can break out by category.
I think it's important for us because, again, when it gets reported out, it's a big round number. I think people need to understand that all of these demonstrations and people's due democratic process have added quite a bit, but we'd like to put that in a category, because I know normally you pile it up with special events, but it's really
Right,
it's an unforeseen event, maybe special to some people.
Yes, but we can, we do have protests have a separate category. They don't go under special events. Court also has a separate category, and we're in the area of like $24 million a year in court costs. So everything is pretty much broken down, but whatever you'd like to see in regard, whether it's by month or annually, we have our protests down, even not only protests, but any special events that result,
we saw the
candidate
line
visits for the last couple months. All of them require a lot of moving parts.
Have we seen an increase related to courts? There's been some discussion around CJAB, around the folks having to come downtown as opposed to the stations. Have we seen an increase in overtime expenses related to that?
Every year our overtime goes up a little bit, but I believe most of that, court overtime, but I believe most of it is attributed to the FOP raises. So when you're talking about 3.25% a year, but there is, what happens with the court overtime when it's not in the districts is it doesn't make that officer available to be on patrol until that time happens. So it affects not only day work court, but overtime as well. So it does create a different dynamic that we didn't have years ago when we had court in each of the divisions.
Okay, so we're not experiencing overtime, but we are experiencing a census decrease because you have less officers on the field during day
Yes,
shift.
if you're on day work, and we make an effort to get police officers in court on day work because it's obviously fiscally responsible, we have to balance it with our needs to protect each of those communities. So when they had divisional hearings, they were able to ride in their car until they were called in for court. They don't have that same ability to do so when they're in court downtown because they're not in their district or near their district.
Yeah, that's something that we're going to have to monitor and have a discussion about. Obviously, I appreciate all the overtime I get in my divisions and my districts because of my crime statistics, but at the same time, I want to make sure that the overtime isn't as a result of court, but more around public safety, but I am concerned around the census numbers in the districts during the day. I don't think people realize how low some of our districts are during the day, and it's something that we'll need to talk about a little bit about, if we're asking folks to potentially having to do overtime to cover some of those slots.
Absolutely.
I think it's an area of concern, and I know it's really hard for us to ask the captains and the officers to do more if they're just assigned to court. What is the difference in terms of timing? Because you said before they used to be able to drive around until they were called to court and they got a 2-hour notice, right?
Well, they would just get notice and go right to their divisional hearing, but they were working in that district, so they were very close. When you have to then go downtown give up your patrol car, drive down. There's that lag. If you're in the 19th district or you're from the 8th district, to get down to Center City is somewhat of a challenge when your case is ready. Where when it was in the division, you could just wait until you had a ready case and they would call in 2512 car or 1812 car and they could come right into headquarters. Now with no divisional hearings anymore, everybody has to go downtown, so it leaves us without the availability for patrol until their case was called. A lot of those officers then had court downtown, so would then have to go downtown after the divisional hearing for
Okay.
the next level of cases.
So that was
But
one of the justifications for bringing everything downtown?
I really am not sure what the reason was. I just know that it made sense at the time and
Okay,
seemed to work.
okay, thank you. Thank you so much, Commissioner.
Christine Coulter?
All right. Chair recognizes Councilwoman Parker.
Thank you, Madam Chair, and good afternoon to
Good afternoon.
each of you. Is someone here from the City Commissioner's office?
I'm sorry, for the record, Councilman Heenan is here. I'm so sorry. Councilwoman Blackwell has also joined us, so we have a super quorum.
Thank you, thank you both for approaching, and I want you to feel free if you don't know the answer to these questions, because it would be, in essence, unprecedented, and/or we are not certain with how the process works. If you could just provide a response in writing to our chair so that it can be distributed to the committee, that would be gratefully appreciated. Let me just say this. We've heard a lot of discussion about these potential election recounts. We heard about Wisconsin. Pennsylvania has been sort of much the next hot topic in the news. We've heard about people raising money to pay for it. My question to you is, if there is a recount in Pennsylvania, what is the potential economic impact for the City Commissioner's office in the city of Philadelphia? How does the financing work? Is this something that the candidates pay for and is paid directly to the state? What kind of costs or expenses would the City Commissioner's office incur if, in fact, there was a recount in Pennsylvania?
Good afternoon, Madam Chairman. My name is Gregory Irvin. I'm a voter registration administrator for the City of Philadelphia. And right now, we're in the process of having various people coming in there filing their petitions to ask for a recount for the 2016 general election. Our commissioners are busy right now. They're constantly, today they've been in touch with the Department of State and the Secretary of the Commonwealth, getting some guidance on this. What has normally happened in the past is this cost is incurred by the state of Pennsylvania. We actually put out the money and they reimburse it. It's not a large, I don't have a figure for you because we wasn't prepared for that, but it's not a large cost because it's basically what we normally do. And all it would incur is recounting everything that's been done already. And by that, it's the electronic cartridges which we read from the machine, basically.
So I just wanted you to repeat the most important part for the benefit of the taxpayers is, I think that one line is that the state incurs all of the costs associated with the recount and reimburses. That's what taxpayers want to hear, reimburses the city of Philadelphia.
Yes, Councilwoman, state reimburses us for that.
Right, and so although we're talking about a recount, in essence, the cartridges that we already have that recorded the results, do we have a general estimate of how much manpower it would take to get that done for Philadelphia? Or how long that would take for Philadelphia?
Actually, if we're just going to do the cartridges, it probably takes a few hours, actually. It takes less than 5 hours to reread each cartridge from election night.
Okay. Thank you. Thank you very much.
You're
Just
welcome.
wanted to hear that for the record, because we've heard a lot about costs. We know about the state's role and involvement, but questions surrounding the direct financial impact that it will have on the city of Philadelphia, and about how long does that reimbursement usually take from the Commonwealth to get back to the city?
Yeah, it takes 3 weeks for the state to reimburse us.
Okay. Thank you very much for your response.
You're welcome.
Thank you. For the record, we, as I mentioned earlier, we're holding Bill 161009 and 161011 around the library. Wanted the budget director to, for the record, clarify why. You guys are free to go.
It's my understanding that I think there was some confusion about whether the funds were needed to amend the capital budget and the program, but I believe that the library has enough prior year funds that they should be able to meet the matching requirements of the RACP grant, and don't need the transfer.
Is that what the letter says that's in our packet?
I don't think I have that letter, so I'm not.
I thought this was new funding.
So they have, I don't have that letter that you're referring to, so I'm not sure what the.
Okay. If there are no other questions, just one last question. How is this mid-year transfer being influenced by those new departments doing performance-based budgeting?
So there are, we're still working with the departments that are going to be in our first cycle of program-based budgeting. So for the FY18 budget, we will have, a significant number of departments that are going to be submitting their budget as a program-based budgeting rather than the typical division-based budget. It's around 18 to 20 departments. The way that we are, and we will actually hope to set up some briefings with council members to talk about what the budget detail will look like. It'll look slightly different from what you're used to because of the program-based component, where we will include things like performance metrics as well as other associated costs and revenues that aren't normally within the budget detail. We are focused with, especially on the first round of program-based budgeting, is just making sure that we're getting the allocations correctly by program and understanding the metrics that go along with it. I think the biggest change is less so much in the FY17 process, but more in the FY18 proposed budget. We hope to be able to kind of show what the impact of providing these fundings by the kind of the metrics and how we will evaluate each program. And I think that will be one of the big changes, as well as understanding, better understanding the revenue that each program generates. Right now, you can see it by department, but you don't necessarily see it by program. And so we want to better align those two things. And so those are the things that you'll see differently in the FY18 budget process for those departments who are going through the program-based budgeting process with us.
Are we looking at those items? I'm looking at the deviations from the projections versus the actual overtime and others. And I'm saying, what are we doing now as they prepare to submit a performance-based budgeting to ensure that they are monitoring those budget line items that seem to be thematic,
So I think for us, we want to understand how the changes in their expenditures are impacting their performance. And it should be. If there are increase in it, it should be shown. We should be able to see some results, and I think that's where we will be focusing.
Exactly. I'm very happy to see that, for instance, in the Department of Licenses and Inspections, they were able to quickly tabulate what the additional $1 million gives us. And I would think that that's kind of where we want to go, that as soon as you're doing right now, of course, I can't find it. But they're able to show specifically how many additional demos they're going to do for that amount. And I know we have another hearing scheduled, and so I don't want to take too much time, but I did want to have somebody from the health department speak to us about this tobacco retail database. Oh, great. And then no, I'll call it in a minute.
You touched on my question.
Oh, the demolition. Oh, okay. I'm sorry. Yeah, now of course I can't find it. So much of
it. I think it's after the finance director's testimony before the Division of Housing and Community Development. It says 50 additional.
Oh, yeah. For the record, Councilman, the $9 million initial appropriation was for 525 imminently dangerous buildings. The $1 million gets us an additional 50.
Okay.
You have a? Okay. Go ahead.
Good afternoon, Chairwoman Quinones-Sanchez and members of the Appropriations Committee. I'm Dr. Cheryl Bettigal, Director of the Division of Chronic Disease Prevention of the Philadelphia Department of Public Health.
I don't need you to read your testimony. I just wanted, you're instituting a new tobacco retail database. So I wanted to know how that was going to be implemented, because don't we sublet that out to PHMC to do that work?
So HPC, which is part of PHMC, does our compliance checks, and they send us data on the compliance check process. The Philadelphia Retailer Database is something that we actually will be maintaining ourselves. And what we're trying to do is take it from this antiquated state to a modern database that can, for example, pull in information rather than having to have all information entered manually.
For the enforcement that the external agency is doing, or is this just a generic database?
So there's kind of a collaboration that happens. So HPC does those compliance checks and they send us information. Tickets are issued by health department staff who write up the ticket based on the information from the compliance check and then take it out to the individual store to deliver it. So, and permitting enforcement is also done by the health department rather than by a contract agency.
Okay. All right, and if you don't know the answer to this question, you can send it to the database. I know you can send it to the chair. One of the concerns was the amount of lag time between the ticket being issued and the businesses getting. How are we getting the ticket? How have we improved that?
So I know that has been historically a concern. We took a look at our...
It's a problem. It's not a concern. It's a huge problem.
Well, we ran the data for 2015. The average time between issuance of a ticket, between a failed compliance check and the issuance of a ticket was 2.3 days. And that actually includes weekends. So in general, they have tightened that up quite a lot. There was a period in December of last year through the beginning of January during which we were shorthanded. They were trying to hire an additional sanitarian, and it was right around the holidays. And our supervisor for the sanitarians was also processing the new permits, which has been a heavily manual process. So between all those things, there were some delays in the 2 to 2.5 week range. But we're back on track now. And
the reason this is important is people videotape this stuff. And so in order for you to be able to challenge your ticket, if you don't get it within a certain amount of time, the business doesn't have the video. So that's why the timing issue is important. Okay, thank you very much. Councilman Dong, you had a question?
Yes. Thank you, Madam Chairwoman. This is a question, I guess, for Anna. In the 2016 budget, do you recall the amount of dollars? Was it like a $4.2 billion budget? Do you recall the amount of dollars allocated budget-wise for payroll and overtime?
I can get you the exact payroll versus overtime. I mean, I can look up payroll, but it's hard for me to figure out.
So what I'd like to see is the 2016 budget payroll number and the 2016 overtime number compared to the actual payroll and the actual overtime. So report card. I realize you were only here for half the time, though, right? This administration.
Yeah, but we can get that to you.
This way, at least we know how we're doing.
Yeah,
Okay.
we can do that.
Thank you.
Any other questions from our committee? Seeing none, again, I want to thank you personally as a budget director for getting us all the detailed information and the summaries that we shared with our colleagues prior to the hearing, because that obviously helps us move some of the questions along. We're going to go into our public meeting of the Committee on Appropriations. And again, I want to establish that we are only moving on bills 161012 and 161010. You can do them together. So I'm going to recognize Councilwoman Parker for a motion on both bills.
Thank you. Thank you, Madam Chair. I move for the adoption of Bill number 161010 and 161012.
I second that motion.
All those in favor? Any opposition? We need rule suspension. For bills, can you add with rule suspension?
So that the rules and council be suspended?
To permit first reading. I'm sorry, we need to do a script.
Okay. So we also ask, Madam Chair, that we have a rule suspension so that these bills can be reported out of committee with a favorable recommendation and be placed on the first reading calendar.
Second.
All those in favor? Any opposition? Seeing none. Bills number 161010, 161012 will be moved out of this committee with a favorable recommendation and further with a rule suspension to allow first reading at our next public session. Thank you all for coming here today.